I did not expect the end of the world to become a zoning problem. That sounds like a joke, but it is the most accurate way I can explain what happened after the first panic waves burned out and the highways emptied. The early days were about escape, noise, and luck. The months after that were about water lines, fuel rotation, sanitation trenches, sleeping schedules, and arguments about where to put a machine shop. People think survival is all running and fighting. Running only gets you through the first week. After that, it becomes a job. Then it becomes a town. My name is Aaron Pike. Before the outbreak, I was a public works supervisor for a county road department in western North Carolina. My normal life was culverts, gravel roads, washouts after storms, brush clearing, and crews who were always short on parts and time. I knew how to get a backhoe where nobody thought a backhoe could go. I knew how to read a slope, how to keep a dirt road from turning into a stream, and how to make a temporary fix last longer than it had any right to. I was not special. I was useful. When people started calling the infected walkers, I hated the word. It sounded too simple, too familiar, like a thing from a show. But after a while it stuck, because it was easier to say than infected people, and because names matter when your nerves are worn thin and you need fast communication. Walker near the East Gate is faster than a long explanation, so we used it, and I used it too, even though I never liked it. The place where we built what people later called our mini-city sat in a fold of land north of Lake Jocassee, near the South Carolina and North Carolina line, on a patchwork of old logging roads and hunting leases. I will not give exact coordinates, not because I think anyone is coming to take it now, but because habits like that are hard to break. It was remote without being impossible. That mattered. Remote alone gets you killed slowly. You still need access to salvage routes, water, timber, and ground that can support structures. I did not start the settlement. I was brought into it. The first time I saw the site, it was nothing but 3 tents, a tarp kitchen, a smoking fire pit, and a line of cars hidden under cut branches. There were 15 people, 1 pickup that still ran consistently, and 2 generators that drank gasoline like they were trying to finish the tank on purpose. They had chosen the location for the right reasons and were still making all the wrong decisions. The person in charge that day was a woman named Leah Mendoza. She had been an emergency room nurse in Greenville. She was tired, direct, and better at staying calm than anyone I knew. She did not introduce herself with a speech. She pointed to a slope turning slick in the rain and said, "Can you tell me how long before that path becomes unusable?" I looked at the foot traffic, the exposed roots, the way runoff was cutting shallow channels, and the red clay beginning to glaze over. If it keeps raining like this, maybe 2 days before someone falls and breaks an ankle. A week before you can't get a loaded cart up it. She nodded once and said, "Stay for dinner." That was how I joined. Leah had already done the hard part, the part most groups fail at. She had gathered a mix of people who could do things and who were willing to be told no. The second part is harder than most people think. Skills are common enough. Discipline is not. We had Leah, who could triage, run a small clinic, and make hard calls without turning cruel. We had Nate Carver, a diesel mechanic from Pickens County who had worked on logging equipment, farm tractors, and heavy trucks. We had Brianna Shaw, a high school science teacher who became our record keeper, inventory manager, and eventually our school teacher when children started arriving. We had Curtis Bell, a former National Guard armorer who knew firearms safety, maintenance, and how to train scared people not to do reckless things. We had Mina and Yusuf Rahman, a married pair who owned a small grocery before everything fell apart. They understood storage, spoilage, rationing, and how much food people really consume when they are doing physical labor all day. We had Darnell Price, a survey technician with a quiet voice and a laser measure he protected like treasure. We had Tasha Greer, a former park ranger with trail knowledge and fieldcraft. We had others too, and over time many more, but those were the core people I leaned on in the first months. Our first real meeting happened under a blue tarp while rain hit hard enough that we had to raise our voices. Leah asked one question: do we keep moving, or do we build? Most groups at that stage were still thinking in days. We forced ourselves to think in seasons. That changed everything. Keep moving sounds safer until you list what it means. It means constant exposure. It means fuel use. It means no reliable sanitation. It means no control over terrain. It means every night is a new unknown. It means a child with a fever becomes a crisis. It means one bad roadblock can end the entire group. We had already lived enough of that to understand the cost. Build sounds risky because you become visible and attached. But if you choose well and plan correctly, building gives you control over sleep, water, food prep, waste, repairs, and watch positions. Control is survival. I argued for building, but not where they had placed the tents. The original camp was too low in one section and too exposed from another. The stream nearby was reliable, but the banks would flood after sustained rain. The ridge above offered better observation, but poor soil and too much wind. We spent 2 days walking the area with Darnell and Tasha, marking routes with cloth strips and making notes in Brianna's waterproof notebook. The final layout started with one decision that saved us more than once. We divided the site into layers. We did not build one big camp, we built zones. The outer layer was deception and noise control, hidden parking under cut saplings and camo netting. No straight, obvious trails. Cooking smoke reduced during daylight when possible. Reflective surfaces covered. Nightlight discipline was strict. If you could see the glow from 50 yards, it was too bright. The second layer was access control. We reused old logging road choke points and created vehicle barriers from felled timber, chain, and abandoned equipment. We did not make anything look like a fortress from a distance. A fortress attracts attention. We made it look like a place a storm had damaged and nobody bothered to clear. The third layer was living and workspace. That became our mini-city over time. Sleeping cabins, cookhouse, water treatment shed, repair bay, clinic, storehouse, meeting shelter, radio room, laundry racks, fuel cage, and later a greenhouse line and a saw station. The fourth layer was fallback. Hidden caches, a small secondary camp uphill, and emergency routes cut through laurel thickets only our people knew. At the beginning, all that existed only on paper and in our heads. We still slept in tents and used 5-gallon buckets for everything. But once you have a plan, work starts to stack. The first week of building was miserable and productive. We dug drainage ditches in rain that turned the clay into red paste. We laid corduroy paths in the worst mud using small logs cut from the slope. We built raised sleeping platforms from salvaged deck boards and pallet wood so people could get off wet ground. Nate got one generator running steadily, and we limited its use to battery charging, radio time, and short tool windows. Curtis began a safety routine every morning before work details. Where firearms were, who was carrying, who was not, where children stayed, what words we used if walkers were spotted. That part probably kept us alive more than any barrier. Panic kills groups. Friendly mistakes kill groups. Bad communication kills groups. Curtis had a simple rule. If you are not on watch, on patrol, or assigned to perimeter work, your firearm stays slung or secured. Chamber clear unless there is a direct threat, and your finger stays off the trigger always. He made people repeat it until they were annoyed. Then he made them repeat it again. Some people complained. He ignored them. Later, after 2 near accidents and 0 accidental shootings, nobody complained. Food was our next major problem. People remember the day stores emptied. They do not think enough about what happens after. The first rounds of canned food keep you alive. The second problem is calories versus labor. Building a settlement burns through food fast. A person digging, hauling, chopping and carrying all day needs more than they think. Mina and Yusuf did the math on a white board salvaged from a church classroom. They posted rations publicly. It was not generous. It was fair. We sent salvage teams on a schedule, not random trips. That was another shift in mindset. No hero runs. No, I saw a place and went in. Every trip had a goal, route, fallback, and return time. Tasha planned movement. I planned load priorities. Leah decided what medical supplies were worth the risk. Nate made lists for fuel, belts, filters, hose clamps, wire, and batteries. Curtis set security rules and only sent people who could follow them. In those first months, we worked a triangle. Small towns on the edges for food and household goods, rural properties for tools and fuel if abandoned, and industrial yards for parts. We avoided major city centers unless there was a critical need. Too many walkers, too many blind corners, too many desperate people. A remote hospital annex or closed county maintenance lot was worth more to us than a large store deep in an urban area. The first structure we built that made the place feel real was the cookhouse. Up until then, camp life feels temporary, no matter what you say. The cookhouse was framed from treated lumber taken from an unfinished lakeside rental project. We salvaged roofing panels from an equipment shed. The stove was a heavy cast iron unit from an old hunting camp, patched and resealed by Nate. We set spark arrest mesh on the flue because one roof fire would have been the end of us. The floor was rough, the walls had gaps, and the door never hung right, but it gave us a dry place to prepare food for 30 people at once by the time we finished. That number had crept up without us admitting it. 15 became 19. 19 became 24. Then a family arrived with 2 children and an older uncle who moved slowly but could sharpen tools better than anyone. Then 3 linemen from Georgia showed up in a utility truck with 1 broken axle and enough hardware to make half our electrical system possible. Then, a woman named Holly Wade, who had managed a small feed store, arrived with seed catalogs, notebooks, and a level of organization that made Mina smile for the first time in days. Growth is dangerous. Every new person brings labor and knowledge, but also risk, stress, and consumption. Leah refused open admission after the 2nd month. That sounds harsh. It was survival. We still helped people when we could, but help did not automatically mean join. We created a screening area outside the inner zone and a 3-day observation policy for anyone seeking entry. Medical check if possible, questions, work trial, behavior assessment. No exceptions, even when people argued. Leah took the anger herself so the rest of us could keep working. As the camp expanded, we started hearing the same phrase from new arrivals. "I thought I was looking for a camp, but this is a town." I corrected them every time. "No, this is a work site that lets us sleep." I was wrong, and they were right. By late fall, we had a defined Main Street. Nobody named it officially, but people started saying, "Meet me by the shop," or "Take that to the clinic lane," and everyone knew where to go. We built structures in practical clusters. The machine and repair area sat on the flattest packed ground near vehicle access. The clinic stayed uphill from waste and fuel storage. The cookhouse and dry storage were central, but with fire breaks cleared around them. Sleeping cabins spread in small groups instead of one large block, so one problem would not hit everyone at once. We dug proper latrine trenches at first, then transitioned to a more controlled setup with lime, covered pits, and strict hand washing when we had enough containers and soap stock. Sanitation is not exciting. It is the line between a hard life and an outbreak inside your outbreak. Brianna began documenting everything because memory gets unreliable when every day feels urgent. She kept build logs, ration logs, weather notes, fuel records, and a board listing daily assignments. She also started a skills registry, and that changed how we used people. One man who seemed quiet and unremarkable turned out to have spent 10 years doing refrigeration work. Suddenly, he was helping us build a cooler room using salvaged insulation panels and a small generator window to preserve medicine and some food. A retired librarian became the best person in camp at managing lending of tools and tracking returns without starting arguments. A college student studying accounting became our quartermaster assistant. Nobody laughed at paperwork after the first winter. The first winter was when the mini-city either became real or would have failed. Cold changes everything. Mud freezes, then thaws. People stay indoors more. Airflow gets reduced because everybody wants warmth, which increases sickness risk. Batteries perform worse. Water lines freeze if you get careless. Firewood consumption climbs faster than your estimates. Walkers move differently in cold weather, too. They do not stop. They do not give up because your hands hurt. They just keep coming when they catch scent or sound, and the trees carry sound farther on some nights than you expect. We did not have a water system at first. We had people carrying containers from the stream and treating in batches. That was labor-heavy and vulnerable. So, before the hard freezes, Darnell and I laid out a gravity-fed line from a spring higher up the slope that Tasha had found while scouting. We tested flow with buckets and a stopwatch, and confirmed it was enough for basic use if rationed. Nate and the lineman rigged a collection box, coarse screening, and a line down to a storage tank built from linked food-grade containers inside a small insulated shed. We still treated drinking water separately by boiling and filtration, but that spring line gave us reliable non-potable water, and later a better treatment chain. It cut hundreds of pounds of daily carry labor from the schedule. That one project freed people for other work and reduced injuries. It also taught the settlement a lesson I repeated for years. The best defense is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a pipe, a ditch, or a schedule that prevents fatigue. Security stayed constant in the background. We had watchers on rotating shifts and covered hides along the access routes. We used radios sparingly to save battery, with plain language check-ins every 30 minutes in higher-risk periods and longer intervals at night. Curtis trained people to report what they saw without panic language. Not, "There are a lot." Instead, I count 7 walkers, moving south to north, 100 yards past the lower barrier. No sign they noticed us. Calm information is useful. Fear is contagious. Most walker encounters near camp were not dramatic. That is another thing people misunderstand. The dangerous moments are often small. One walker drifting onto a trail at dusk while someone is hauling water. 2 caught on a branch line making noise that pulls more. A single one wedged in debris near a culvert where a team is trying to move quietly. We handled most of them with silence and distance, redirecting, waiting, or using quiet tools when necessary. Curtis hated needless noise. He was right. The real threats in those months were not the walkers. They were fatigue, weather, and people. The first outside group we had trouble with came in late January. 4 men, 1 woman, 2 trucks, moving too fast and too openly for people who were just passing through. Tasha spotted them first from an upper overlook. They followed an old access road we had partially blocked, stopped, got out, and began studying tire marks. That meant they were trackers, or at least paying attention. Curtis and I moved to the contact point with Leah on the radio. Leah's rules for contact were clear. Distance, visible hands. No shouting unless necessary. No promises. We met them at a bend where our people had cover and theirs did not know the terrain. The man who talked first called himself Roy. He was polite enough at the start, all smiles, and we're just looking to trade. That can be real. It can also be a probe. They had some useful goods, propane cylinders, canned goods, medical gauze, diesel additive. But their questions were wrong. Not what we needed, not whether we had a medic. They wanted numbers, how many people, how many vehicles, whether we had fuel storage, whether children were present. I gave vague answers. Roy's smile thinned. Then he looked past me and said, "That smoke is pretty steady for a small camp." There was no point pretending then. He had seen enough. Leah stepped in and did what she did best. She set terms in a tone that made it sound normal and final. "We can trade at this point only. You leave your long guns in your truck. We bring goods here. No one follows anyone. If that does not work for you, you can turn around now." Roy laughed once, looking at Curtis, maybe expecting a challenge. Curtis just looked back, calm, rifle slung, hand nowhere near it. Quiet confidence bothers pushy people. Roy tried another angle. "We don't want trouble. We may need a place to stay if weather gets worse." Leah said, "We don't have capacity." That was true and not true. We had room physically. We did not have room for them. They traded. They left. We watched them circle once on a ridge road before disappearing. That night, we changed watch schedules and moved 2 caches. 3 days later, they came back after dark. Not all of them. 2 men on foot, likely scouting for a better look. They hit one of our noise indicators. Simple line and metal pieces, nothing dramatic. Just enough for a watcher to know movement happened in a specific corridor. Tasha saw them through a thermal monocular we had only because one of the linemen had grabbed it from a work contact during the collapse. A tool like that feels almost unfair in the woods at night. She tracked them, relayed movement, and we let them get close enough to understand our perimeter was not sloppy. Curtis and I intercepted at a narrow point with 2 others in cover. We used lights only at the last second and kept instructions short. They froze, then one bolted. Tasha's voice came on the radio from uphill. "Runner is looping east, likely back to road." She was right. We held the other, disarmed him, and questioned him briefly. They had been told to count structures and look for fuel. Roy had guessed correctly that a growing settlement would need stored diesel and gasoline. We released him before dawn with a message I was not sure would matter. Do not come back. Roy did not come back, but other people did in later years. A functioning settlement attracts attention the way a lit house attracts eyes in a blackout. That became the central truth of our mini-city. The walkers were not gone. The people problem was not gone. Success creates its own risk. Spring brought growth so fast it scared me. The winter survivors started moving again. Some had spent months in isolated cabins, churches, marinas, maintenance sheds, and hunting camps. By March, our screening area saw more traffic than at any time since the first chaos. We tightened rules and still brought in new people because we needed to. The settlement had crossed a threshold where maintenance itself demanded manpower. Roofs needed patching. Paths needed regrading. Firewood cutting could not stop just because weather improved. Gardens had to be planned and fenced. Patrol routes had to be extended because our footprint had expanded. We held our first formal council under the meeting shelter, which was just a large timber frame with a metal roof and bench seating at that point. Leah insisted on it because too much decision-making was happening informally, which meant misunderstandings and resentment. The council included her, me, Curtis, Mina, Nate, Brianna, Tasha, and 2 rotating seats chosen by work crews. We were not trying to copy any government. We were trying to stop chaos from wearing a respectable face. The agenda from that first council looks small now. Food planting plan, fuel rationing, admission policy, trade policy, and whether to build a permanent wall around the inner zone. That wall argument lasted 3 hours. Half the camp wanted one big wall because it felt safer. I understood that. Walls are visible reassurance. But one large wall around a growing settlement would have cost labor we did not have, timber we needed elsewhere, and constant maintenance. It would also create a false sense of security and a bottleneck problem if walkers pressed in at one point. Instead, I proposed layered barriers and controlled lanes, fenced garden zones, hardened building clusters, clear lines of sight, and selective fortification of key points. Curtis backed me, but for different reasons. A wall makes people lazy, he said. Watch discipline gets worse. In the end, we compromised. We built stronger perimeter features along likely approach routes and around the core zone, but we did not encircle the entire settlement with one continuous wall. It looked less dramatic and worked better. The gardens changed the rhythm of the camp. Once you put crops in the ground, time becomes less abstract. Holly led the planting effort with a level of planning that impressed everyone. She mapped sun exposure, soil type, and drainage. We amended what we could with compost, ash, and salvaged bags of lime and fertilizer used carefully. We planted potatoes, beans, corn, squash, collards, onions, and anything else with a chance. We started seed trays in protected spaces and built simple frames with clear panels for early starts. We fenced every plot because deer did not care that civilization had collapsed, and wild hogs cared even less. People talk about self-sufficiency like it arrives all at once. It does not. The first season's harvest helps, but it does not replace stored food. It supplements. It improves health. It reduces pressure. It teaches. Our first real victory was not a giant crop. It was consistency. By summer of the second year, the mini-city had over 80 residents and a fluctuating group of regular trade contacts from smaller survivor clusters. We still did not advertise. Word spread anyway. There's a place in the mountains that has a clinic. There's a place that repairs engines. There's a place where people work for rations and can sleep inside. Rumor grows faster than roads. With growth came specialization. Nate's repair area became a proper machine yard with covered bays built from pole frames and salvaged metal roofing. He rebuilt alternators, repaired fuel pumps, fabricated brackets from scrap steel, and kept a fleet of mismatched vehicles running far beyond what should have been possible. We had a retired welder named Ed Grissom arrive and nearly cry when he saw the generator-powered welder Nate had pieced together from scavenged parts and hope. With Ed there, our repair capability jumped overnight. Leah's clinic expanded from 1 room to 3, exam area, recovery space, and a small locked medicine room. We scavenged dental supplies when we could because a bad tooth can disable a person just as effectively as a sprained ankle in this kind of life. We built hand-washing stations outside every major work area. Brianna pushed literacy and schooling for the kids and adults alike. "If you can read the labels," she said, tapping a box of chemicals, "you are harder to kill." She was right. We established a radio room in a reinforced cabin with grounded antennas run through improvised lightning protection because storms in that region are no joke. A former amateur radio operator named Gene Holloway found us after hearing our periodic safety broadcasts and became our communications lead. He set schedules, taught radio discipline, and helped us listen without talking too much. Through him, we learned about other survivor settlements, some stable, some gone by the time the message reached us. Distance no longer meant ignorance, but it also meant we carried news of losses we could not help. Then came the event that forced us to stop pretending the walkers were mostly a perimeter nuisance. It started with one truck arriving hot just before sunset, engine knocking, windshield cracked. 2 people in the bed, one on foot hanging onto the side rail. They came from a logging road route west of us and nearly rolled at the lower turn. The driver, a woman named Cassie, jumped out before the truck stopped moving fully and shouted, "They're driving them! They're pushing them this way!" At first I thought she meant people were being chased. Then I saw her passenger, an older man with a bandaged arm, trying to talk through exhaustion. "A group," he said, armed. "They hit our camp, set fires. They used horns and shot into the trees, pushed a whole stream of walkers uphill behind us." That changed the scale immediately. A random cluster of walkers is one thing. A moving mass redirected by hostile people is another. In the woods, terrain channels movement. If enough walkers get pushed into a narrow approach and continue to follow sound or motion, they can pressure barriers and create openings, even if each individual is slow. We went to emergency protocol. No speeches. Everyone had drilled. Curtis took perimeter command. I took engineering and obstacle control. Leah prepared the clinic and assigned runners. Nate and Ed started every machine we could risk running, then shut all but the essential ones to preserve a fuel for a prolonged event. Brianna moved children and non-combat workers to the hardened inner structures with assigned supervisors. Tasha and 2 scouts moved to ridge observation points to count and track movement. The first report came in at 7:40 p.m. I count at least 40 at the west draw, spread line, more behind in trees. Sound source likely intermittent vehicle horn farther back. 40 in open terrain is manageable if you have space and discipline. In mixed woods at dusk with roots, brush, and limited lines of sight, 40 can become a chain reaction of noise and mistakes. Our west approach had 3 layers prepared for exactly this kind of pressure, though we had never tested them at that scale. First, a brush-cleared lane that narrowed movement and improved sight lines. Second, a staggered timber barrier system that blocked direct flow and forced walkers to angle, slow, and bunch. Third, fallback positions covering the final approach to the core zone. We also had side routes for teams to reposition without crossing open ground. The trick was not to get drawn into loud, sustained engagement that would pull in everything else in the area. We used quiet methods where possible, and only escalated when bunching threatened to overwhelm a choke point. Curtis's voice on the radio stayed steady the entire time. Hold spacing, watch footing, confirm behind before moving. Do not chase, let the barriers work. I moved between barrier teams with a maul, pry bar, and 2 crew members because wood shifts under pressure. The engineering reality of defense is boring until the moment it matters. A brace pin works loose. A post leans. A chain tie slips. If you do not fix small failures fast, they become a breach. Around 9 p.m., Tasha reported lights on a ridge road. 2 vehicles. They are stopping and sounding horns again. This is deliberate. We could not pursue. Not then. Protecting the settlement came first. The pressure continued in waves until after midnight. Not hundreds at once, but enough over enough hours to wear people down. That is how walkers win ground against organized survivors, not by speed, by forcing repeated effort, by turning attention into a finite resource. We rotated teams, pushed water and food to positions, and used whistles for close-range coordination when radios got crowded. One of the west barriers partially failed at 12:30 a.m. when saturated soil let a support stake pull loose. A section shifted and opened a gap wider than I liked. We had a backup line behind it, but if the front obstacle collapsed entirely, we would lose precious distance. Nate came in with a compact tractor, one of our loudest and most valuable tools, while Ed and I guided under red filtered lights. We set a fresh support using a length of steel pipe and chain, and braced it against a buried anchor point we had installed months earlier and never needed. When it held, I remember feeling something close to pride and shame at the same time. Pride because the system worked. Shame because I had almost cut that anchor from the build plan to save labor. By dawn, the pressure tapered. Tasha's final ridge report said the horn vehicles had left. We did not cheer. We were too tired, and we all knew this had been a test, whether intentional or not. Somebody out there had learned that sound could turn the walker threat into a weapon. If they did it once, they or others could do it again. We counted injuries after sunrise, mostly exhaustion, strains, 1 broken wrist from a fall, 2 shallow cuts, 1 severe dehydration case because a man skipped his water during a long watch rotation. No deaths. No breach of the core zone. That outcome came from preparation, not luck, though luck always takes a seat at the table. The council met that afternoon with mud still on our boots. We made 3 immediate decisions. First, expand ridge observation and early warning farther west. Second, reduce our visible signatures even more. Smoke timing, vehicle movement, noise windows. Third, build decoy noise points and route control features outside the main perimeter so we could influence walker movement before they reached our barriers. That third point felt strange to some people. We were used to blocking, hiding, or avoiding. Now we were talking about shaping movement. Darnell and I mapped shallow draws and game trails where walkers naturally drifted. We placed obstacles, visual breaks, and, in a few controlled situations, timed noise devices far from camp to pull small groups away from key routes. Nothing fancy. Nothing that wasted precious ammunition or required constant attention. Just terrain work and discipline. It worked well enough that by late summer, our perimeter incidents dropped even as regional movement increased. The human threat, however, kept evolving. Trade became both our strength and our vulnerability. A settlement that can repair equipment and provide medical care becomes a hub whether it wants to or not. People arrived with goods and stories. Some stories were true, some were bait. We developed a formal trade yard outside the inner zone with marked spaces, search rules, and no entry lines. Curtis hated negotiation days because they required visible calm and hidden readiness at the same time. I spent many of those days acting like a town foreman in a place that officially did not think of itself as a town. Unload there, stack fuel drums under shade, keep spark sources away, no smoking near the cage. If you want wheel-bearing grease, I need your axle measurements. It felt absurd and normal. One trade contact became a key ally. A river community down toward the Savannah drainage, led by a former marina manager named Paul Ingram. They had boats, fish, and access to different salvage channels than we did. We had repair capacity and medical support. Over time, we established regular exchanges under strict route security. Paul was the first outsider who looked at our central lane, the cookhouse smoke, the school shelter, and the repair yard noise and said, "This is a city by post-collapse standards." I told him, "It's a collection of problems with roofs." He laughed and said, "That is what every city is." By the third year, children born after the outbreak were learning to walk on packed dirt paths between buildings made from scavenged lumber and local timber. That changes a place. Adults can live in survival mode a long time. Children force you to think beyond next winter. Brianna and Holly pushed for a real school building with desks, shelves, and a schedule. Leah pushed for a maternity space in the clinic. Mina pushed for a communal bakery setup because morale improves when people smell bread and because flour rationing is easier to manage in one place. Nate pushed for a dedicated parts storage building because he was tired of losing time to mud and disorganization. I pushed for drainage upgrades and fire breaks because I had seen too many growing settlements become one accident away from collapse. We built all of it, one project at a time. The schoolhouse was a simple rectangle with good windows, shutters, and a stove, but Brianna turned it into the most important room in camp after the clinic. She taught reading, numbers, practical science, map use, and what she called clear thinking. Adults sat in the back during evening sessions pretending they were there for the kids. She taught them too. The bakery cookhouse expansion became the social center. We built better ovens using fire brick salvaged from a damaged restaurant and clay from a nearby bank. Yusuf standardized batch sizes and fuel use with the precision of a logistics officer. "If we guess," he told me while measuring grain with a scale, "we starve slowly and call it bad luck." He and Mina made rationing visible and understandable. People still complained sometimes, but fewer than before. Transparency reduces rumors. The clinic grew stronger, but also carried the heaviest emotional load. Leah trained assistants, documented treatment protocols, and put strict limits on what we could and could not do. "We are not a hospital," she reminded people. "We stabilize, we prevent, we monitor. We refer if there is a place to refer to." Sometimes there was not. Those were the nights she sat alone after everyone slept, writing notes by lantern light, because if she stopped moving entirely, I think the weight would have crushed her. I should say this plainly. Our mini-city was not peaceful. It was organized. Those are not the same thing. We had thefts. We had fights. We had people who wanted more influence than they earned. We had grief that came out sideways. We had fear turn into anger. We had outsiders lie to us, and some of our own lie to themselves. We had months where food stores looked thinner than anyone liked, and months where storms took roofs we had just finished. We had a summer sickness run through the lower cabins despite all our sanitation rules, because one family hid symptoms out of fear of isolation. Leah was furious, then exhausted, then forgiving in the way only people carrying too much responsibility can be. And always, the walkers were still there. Not in giant movie swarms every week. That is not how it was. They were in the tree lines, on old roads, around abandoned gas stations, moving through low areas after rain, snagged in wire fences, drifting toward distant sounds. Enough to make every trip a calculation. Enough to punish a complacency. Enough that no child in our settlement was ever out of earshot of an adult for long. The biggest test of our settlement did not come from a direct attack. It came from fire. Year 4, late August, dry spell longer than normal. We had tracked low humidity for days and tightened burn rules. Then a lightning storm came through with almost no rain. You could smell ozone and hot pine sap by afternoon. Tasha radioed smoke from a ridge south-southwest of us. Small at first, then larger, then moving faster than any of us wanted to hear. Wildfire in that terrain is not a simple line on a map. It runs, drops embers, shifts with wind, and turns gullies into chimneys. We had prepared fire breaks around the core zone, cleared brush, staged water carts, and trained bucket lines, but no preparation makes you comfortable when the sky darkens in the wrong color. For 2 days, the settlement stopped being a town and became a fire operation. I coordinated crews with Ed, Tasha, and Darnell. Nate kept pumps and vehicles alive. Leah ran heat exhaustion treatment and smoke exposure care. Brianna and Holly moved children and elders between safer structures and kept them occupied because panic spreads fast in enclosed groups. Curtis handled perimeter security even during the fire threat because disaster attracts opportunists and because walkers pushed by smoke can appear where you least expect them. That last part nearly broke us. As smoke thickened on the south side, small groups of walkers began drifting along the same draws we were using to stage crews. Visibility dropped. Noise increased. People were already tired and keyed up. The chance of confusion went way up. Curtis solved it with a simple, brutal rule. No one moves alone, no exceptions, and every crew has one person assigned only to watch surroundings. "You are not all firefighters," he told us. "Some of you are just there to keep the rest alive." We lost outer structures. One storage lean-to, 2 empty sheds, a section of fencing, and a stack of lumber I had hoped to use for a new dorm cabin. We saved the core zone and all lives. The fire passed, leaving blackened ridges and ash that turned every footstep gray for weeks. Afterward, standing in the smoke smell, I realized something that should have been obvious earlier. We had spent years hardening against walkers and hostile people, but nature still had the easiest path to wipe us out. So we changed again. We expanded fire breaks. We redesigned roof spacing in new builds. We improved spark control and water staging. We built an elevated cistern platform with gravity-fed outlets for faster response. We stored tools in redundant locations. We ran fire drills the same way Curtis ran security drills. Some people resented the extra work until the next dry season arrived, and they remembered the orange sky. By year 5, our mini-city had a population that moved between 120 and 150, depending on trade traffic, temporary workers, and affiliated outposts. We had paths, districts, routine, and enough continuity that newcomers were shocked by the order. They expected a camp. They found a place with posted work details, quiet hours, a clinic line, a school schedule, tool checkout, repair requests, trade rules, and a bakery queue. It also had defenses, hidden routes, watchtowers built to blend with the tree line, and enough layered barriers that no one who saw them up close would mistake us for easy prey. That kind of growth changes people's ambitions. Some wanted us to expand more, build a larger regional hub, absorb smaller groups, become something like a county seat for survivors. Others wanted the opposite: cap population, go quieter, avoid becoming a target. The council was split for months. I was split too. Part of me looked at the children. The school, the repaired generators humming in the shop, the seed stores, the clinic shelves, and thought, this is what survival is for. Build something stable. Build something worth defending. Build enough that people stop living from emergency to emergency. Another part of me saw the smoke columns from distant conflicts, heard stories on Gene's radio net about settlements taken apart by internal disputes or coordinated raids, and thought, the bigger we get, the louder we become, even when we whisper. The turning point came because of a bridge. About 40 miles by our safest route, there was an old county bridge on a secondary road that connected several survivor areas to our trade network. It had deteriorated for years before the outbreak and got worse with neglect and storm damage. People were still crossing it because they had no better option. One heavy load and that bridge was going to fail, and when it failed it would cut travel times from hours to days and force more traffic onto dangerous routes. Paul, from the river community, asked if we could help assess it. If it goes, he said, we all get smaller. I took a crew with Darnell, Nate, Ed, and Tasha for security. Standing on that bridge, looking at spalled concrete and rusted reinforcement exposed in places, I felt like I was back in my old job, except nobody was coming with county funds or permit paperwork. We did a rough assessment and came to the same conclusion. No full repair possible with our resources, but we could build a controlled bypass crossing nearby if we coordinated labor from multiple settlements. That project changed our region more than any wall or firefight. For 6 weeks, crews from 5 communities worked on a low-water reinforced ford and timber deck crossing at a better site upstream with approach grading, drainage, and traffic rules. It was exhausting, complicated, and full of arguments about labor quotas and who got priority access. It was also the first time I saw multiple survivor groups cooperate on infrastructure, not tied to one settlement's immediate survival. When it was done, travel improved, trade stabilized, and emergency movement became less risky. It also made us more visible as a capable center. Success and risk, again, always together. The threat from walkers never disappeared during any of this. It changed shape with the landscape and with us. Cleared land around our main zones reduced surprise encounters but increased visibility. Better roads and crossings improved movement but created predictable routes walkers could drift onto after storms, fires, or distant disturbances. Trade traffic brought information but also noise and scent trails. Every improvement solved one problem and created another. We learned to think in systems. If we expanded gardens, we needed more fencing and more watch. If we increased livestock, we needed feed plans, waste management, and stronger night enclosures. If we built a new dorm, we needed fire spacing and water access. If we hosted traders overnight, we needed screening, patrol changes, and clearly separated zones. Nothing stood alone. The most difficult year for me personally came after Leah stepped back from day-to-day leadership. She did not quit. She was too needed for that. But years of carrying medical decisions and settlement politics at the same time had worn her down. She asked the council to split responsibilities permanently. Medical operations under her. Civic leadership rotating with a coordinator role. The room went quiet because everybody knew what she was really saying. I cannot be the wall for all of you forever. No one argued. They nominated me as coordinator. I said no twice. The third time, Leah looked at me and said, "You already do half of it. Say yes and do it openly." So I did. Leadership in that place was not speeches and flags. It was listening to two valid concerns and knowing there was not enough lumber to satisfy both. It was deciding which route got cleared first after a storm and knowing the other route's people would have a harder week because of it. It was balancing security with trade, growth with secrecy, fairness with survival math. It was apologizing when we were wrong and changing procedures before pride turned a mistake into policy. I made mistakes. I approved a storage expansion too close to a drainage line and a storm nearly flooded half our dry goods before we caught it. I delayed replacing a watch team lead who was reliable but too harsh, and morale on that section suffered for months. I pushed a salvage run for machine parts after 3 clean trips in a row and ignored Tasha's warning that the route felt wrong. We made it back, but only after losing a trailer and spending a night off route because a walker buildup had shifted near an abandoned interchange. Nobody died, but risk had crept in, and I let routine make me less careful. The settlement corrected me the same way it corrected everyone else, with consequences, work, and no ceremony. Years after the outbreak, people from outside still asked some version of the same question. How did you build all this with walkers out there? The answer is that we built it because walkers were out there. If the threat had ended, many people would have scattered back to old homes, even damaged ones, and tried to restart their previous lives in place. It was the constant pressure, the need for security, shared labor, clinic care, repairs, and organized food systems that held us together long enough to become something larger than a camp. Fear started it. Work sustained it. Routine transformed it. But the threat never went away, and routine can become dangerous if it turns into assumption. The closest we came to losing the core zone happened in year 7 during what should have been a routine trade week. Jean picked up fragmented radio traffic about trouble to the west. A warehouse fire, vehicle horns, scattered groups moving fast. It was incomplete, maybe days old. We raised alert levels but did not lock down fully because we had trade arrivals scheduled and weather was turning rough. That was the kind of compromise settlements make. Total lockdown protects security and damages trust and commerce. Open gates invite trouble. We lived in that tension constantly. At 4:20 p.m., a heavy rain started. Visibility dropped, mud increased, sound carried strangely. By 5 p.m., a trader convoy from the south checked in late and stressed. Road blockage, detoured. We may have picked up followers. Curtis moved to the trade yard with extra watch. I was in the machine district, trying to get a loader under cover before the ground softened too much. Tasha radioed from the east overlook with a tone I had learned to respect immediately. Multiple movement lines, not random. I count at least 60 east-northeast, more obscured by rain. They are converging toward lower access. Not west. East-northeast, a route we considered secondary because terrain was rough and usually less traveled. Usually. The rain masked their noise until they were much closer than I liked. Whether pushed by people earlier, displaced by some event, or simply funneled by storm and terrain, we had a serious walker mass approaching during the worst visibility of the week. To make it worse, our trade yard was active, with non-residents inside the outer control zone and vehicles creating clutter. Curtis started clearing the yard immediately. No debate. Unload later, move now. Some traders obeyed instantly. One driver argued about leaving cargo exposed. Curtis pointed to the tree line and said, "You can keep your cargo or your axle, not both. Pick." He moved. I took a crew and diverted to the lower access to reinforce barriers that had not seen that kind of pressure in months. Rain had softened one embankment, and I could see runoff cutting under a log crib section. Bad timing, as always. Nate arrived with chains and a compact loader, engine growling in low gear. Ed came with steel posts and a sledge. We worked in rain hard enough that mud ran into my gloves. The first walkers hit the lower approach in scattered groups, then in a denser push behind. Not a perfect line, more like a constant stream with bunching at obstacles. Our barrier system slowed them, but rain reduced footing for our teams too. Visibility made depth judgment harder. Voices got lost in weather noise. Radios crackled. This is where training matters. Not because it makes you brave, but because it gives your body a script when your brain is overloaded. Crew spacing. Confirm positions. No one chases beyond marked points. Hydrate, even if you are not thirsty. Rotate before failure, not after. Tasha shifted to side observation and called movements we could not see. Pressure building left channel. 10 to 12 diverting around root mound. Watch the gap. That let Curtis move a team before the gap became a problem. Leah and her assistants ran a treatment station under the meeting shelter and sent water forward in relays. Brianna and Holly kept children calm. And indoors while older teens worked runner duty under supervision. Jean managed radio traffic with the patience of a man untangling knots in a storm. The lower crib section started to fail at 6:10 p.m. Not collapse, but enough movement that I knew we would lose alignment if pressure continued. Nate wanted to bring the loader closer for a fast push. I told him no at first because if that machine got stuck in mud near the barrier, we would create a larger obstruction and lose the machine. He stared at the flow building in the channel and said, "Aaron, if we wait 2 minutes longer, the choice gets made for us." He was right. We took the risk. Nate eased the loader in, while Ed and I guided chain placement to shift a timber block into a tighter angle. Mud sprayed, engine strained, chain snapped taut, and for one terrible second I thought the machine would slide sideways. It held. The timber rolled into place, reducing the gap enough for the barrier to function again. We backed Nate out with inches to spare and one tire spinning uselessly until 3 people with traction mats got him moving. That was the mechanical part. The emotional part came later, after dark, when we finally slowed the influx and started counting. We had injuries, some serious. A crushed foot from a timber shift, a shoulder dislocation, deep bruising, cuts, exhaustion. We lost 2 outer sheds and 1 trade vehicle that could not be recovered before the pressure line overtook the yard. We did not lose the core zone. We did not lose lives. But, for the first time in years, I saw fear on faces that had become too accustomed to competence, not panic. Worse, doubt. Can this place still hold if the pressure gets bigger? That question hung over us for weeks. The council's response was not dramatic. It was work again. We reviewed every failure point and near failure point. We changed route usage in wet weather. We improved drainage under lower barriers. We reduced clutter in the trade yard and enforced stricter unloading windows. We built an emergency vehicle pull-off line. We installed better rain-sheltered observation points. We revised the radio protocol for storm conditions because words get lost when everyone is breathing hard under rain noise. And we talked openly about doubt. I told the settlement something I had not admitted before in those words. This place is not safe. It is safer because you work for it every day. If we treat it like it is finished, we lose it. People nodded because they already knew. They just needed someone to say it without pretending certainty. The years after that became less about expansion and more about durability. We strengthened ties with nearby communities but limited population growth inside the core zone. We helped smaller affiliated outposts develop their own water systems, clinics, and defensive layouts, so pressure on our central settlement decreased. We set up rotating work exchanges where people trained in one place and returned home with skills. Brianna's school expanded into apprenticeship tracks, mechanical basics, sanitation, food preservation, carpentry, radio procedure, first aid. We stopped thinking only in terms of surviving another winter and started thinking in terms of passing knowledge before people who held it aged out or died. That may be the real reason our mini-city lasted. Not the barriers, not the firearms, not the hidden roads. Knowledge transfer. Curtis grew older and less patient with foolishness but more patient with fear. He trained a generation of watch leads who understood restraint as much as readiness. Leah turned her clinic methods into binders and taught others to run sections without her direct oversight. Nate and Ed trained apprentices who could rebuild a pump, diagnose a charging problem, and fabricate a bracket with hand tools when power was scarce. Mina and Yusuf turned food handling and ration systems into standard practice instead of tribal memory. Tasha taught tracking, route reading, and terrain awareness to people who had never spent a night in the woods before the outbreak and now moved through laurel and pine like they belonged there. As for me, I kept building and fixing and arguing about drainage. I also learned to stop saying, "This is just a work site." One evening, years in, I stood on the upper path near sunset after a long day patching roof flashing on the schoolhouse. I could hear the sounds that had become normal, hammering from the repair yard, children reciting something Brianna had them memorizing, a radio check from the West Watch, bread pans clanking in the cookhouse, someone laughing near the laundry lines, a baby crying in a cabin, and then settling, generator noise from the short evening power window, and farther out, faint and constant, the forest. Beyond the cleared lanes and barriers and hidden routes, the walkers were still moving somewhere in those trees. They had not gone away. The threat had not ended. We still posted watch. We still rehearsed emergency plans. We still buried people sometimes and held hard meetings and turned strangers away when we had to. We still woke at noises that should not be there. But inside that layered patch of timber, tin, mud, and discipline, we had done something I did not think possible in the first months under the tarp. We had built a place where survival was not the only activity. People learned. They traded. They repaired. They argued about school schedules and crop rotation, and whether to widen the east path before winter. They planned weddings with hand-sewn clothes and practical shoes. They named children after grandparents and friends, and once after a mechanic who died fixing a pump line during flood season. They carved signs. They painted one wall of the schoolhouse with a map of the region and little marks for Allied settlements. They made routines strong enough that grief and fear did not erase them every week. A mini-city, yes, a rough one, a quiet one, a hidden one, but a city all the same. And the walkers? They never stopped being part of the math. That is the truth people do not like when they hear stories like ours. They want the ending where the walls hold forever and the roads clear and the threat fades into legend. We did not get that ending. Maybe nobody did. What we got was harder and, in my opinion, more real. We built something worth defending in a world that kept testing it. Every season, the same rule applied. Inspect what you trust. Roads wash out, timber rots, fuel goes bad, and people get tired. Watch habits slip, rumors spread, weather shifts, walkers drift. Trouble learns your patterns if you let it. So we inspected, repaired, trained, rotated, and adapted. We treated stability like a machine that needed maintenance, not a prize we had won once. I am telling this now from a room inside what used to be our tool planning office and became a record room later. The walls are lined with shelves made from salvaged pine. On one shelf are Brianna's early notebooks, swollen from rain and thumbed at the corners. On another are Leah's clinic binders. There are route maps from Darnell, training sheets from Curtis, parts logs from Nate, seed records from Holly and Mina, radio schedules from Jean, and build sketches in my handwriting that got more careful over time. Outside this room, the mini-city is quieter than it used to be at this hour, because we shifted the evening power window earlier to save fuel, and because more people use hand tools by choice now. We have learned to live with less noise, but I can still hear enough to know the place is alive. Someone is splitting kindling. Someone is teaching a child to read a measuring tape. Someone is complaining about a wheel hub I told them to clean before assembly. Some things never change. The walkers are still out there. We still lose sleep when the ridge radios call in unusual movement. We still run drills in rain and dark because real problems do not wait for clear weather. We still plan around the possibility that people might use the dead to pressure the living. We still hide what should be hidden and fortify what must be held. The threat has not gone away. Neither have we. If you want the clean version of this story, it is simple. We went into the wilderness, we built a settlement, and we survived. If you want the true version, it is this. We built a mini-city, one ditch, one argument, one ration chart, one repair, one lesson, one watch shift, and one hard decision at a time, while the world outside stayed dangerous and unfinished. We survived because we accepted that the danger was permanent and built anyway. That is not a heroic answer, it is a working answer. And in our world, working answers are the only kind that last.